This is Power 102 Digital Monday. On Mondays, Karen Nunez Tesheira hosts the program Hard Talk. Good afternoon, Karen. Karen has a very special guest in the person of Mr. Dinesh Rambali. Good afternoon, people. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you, David McIntyre, as usual, and always to our listeners from far and wide, because I know we are digital. And of course, you have the comments column that you can send your comments. And even better, if you can participate in discussion. So, yes, we do have a really exciting show. It's very topical, very much what is in the news today, and very much apart from what is in the news today, it's not just only because it is in the news and because it's topical, because it goes to the very heart, I believe, of what we consider an equitable and fair and just society. And it really does challenge those norms. And really, I don't want to talk too much. I'll just say now that I wanted to introduce our guest. I know he's no stranger to anyone who reads the newspapers, watches television. He has been very outspoken and has been consistent, I have to say, in doing that over the last few years. And he's none other than Dinesh Rambali. Yes, I taught him. Yes, I did. But that's beside the point. I just do want to mention that has nothing. I was so many moons ago in another lifetime, another time of my life. But I will say this too. I will say this too. Whilst I have sat out among many people that I have had as former students, he was one. There are people that stand out, and he happened to be one of them. It's just a very, this is my personal view, very kind person, a very caring and very passionate person, very passionate person. That is how it comes across. But we're here to talk about the topic, of course, of the Salary Review Commission and their recommendations made to the government, which, of course, comes from the president, who advises the prime minister. I won't go into too much, but it just goes to, I might want to develop that to Dinesh, Mr. Rambali, why it is the president to the president, because, it's just another reason why we should never have a president that's not elected. But in any event, he has over 19 years experience as a lawyer. He has sat as an industrial court judge, and I have had the opportunity in last 2 years when he has asked me to speak on issues that affect the country, non-political issues, whatever it may have been. I can't recall for them, but I have spoken, and I was very happy to do that. He is a legal advisor, the legal advisor to the Sanatana Dharma Mahasabha, as well as the National Council for Indian Culture, and he has been an industrial court judge. Of course, he is the Member of Parliament for Chaguanas West, continues to hold that portfolio. And from everything one reads, one knows that he is very committed as a parliamentarian. Having been one myself, I know the hard work that goes into that. And he's also known to be outspoken, and this is what we do need, people who are willing to speak out on whatever the issues are. But the issue we are going to speak about on this program is going to be the decision of the Prime Minister to accept the recommendation of the Salary Review Commission. So I will ask, I shouldn't say allow, one of the things I want to do very quickly before I ask Dinesh, Mr. Rambali to really, that's a bad habit because I know you personally, ask Mr. Rambali to give his views. I know he's expressed it in the papers, but I want him to give his whole, take center stage. But before we go center stage, I just want David to do what he does so well, to put out the numbers, because we go, I think you can watch us on Facebook and I think YouTube, but you can follow us right now on the program. So, David.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. The numbers that you can connect with us are 222-8255, 222-8255, and our toll-free number 866-525-1099. Toll-free 866-525-1099. And you can send your comments via YouTube or Facebook, and we'll read them out as soon as they come in.
Yes, and they started coming already. And by the way, if you don't want to be identified, not a problem. We'll just accept that. So, Mr. Rambali, I want to give you the floor. I'm giving you the floor. say all that you've said, some of it in paper, but I want you now, you don't have that limitation of time that would constrain you in what you may have said and what you to say. So I want you to give us your views on the Salary Review Commission, its decision to accept it, the whatever you would like to say on the matter. I give you the floor.
Pleasant good afternoon to you, Miss Karen Nunez Tesheira, to David, and I say that first of all formally, but I'm hoping that we can go informal because I really
Yes, Karen.
appreciate how you have introduced this program, that we can speak about this topic as though we are all just ordinary citizens expressing views, exchanging ideas, and we can agree to disagree, but we share the views, and hopefully at the end of it we are all in a better position of awareness, in a better position as to whether what we are talking about, the implementation of SRC recommendations to increase salaries for top office holders, is something that is going to be beneficial for us, whether short-term, immediate, short-term, long-term, or it is not. So I want to say thank you very much for such a lovely and generous introduction. I would like to thank your technical team, of course, Power 102 Digital, and to the viewers and listeners particularly. I am very grateful that they tune into this program. I myself from time to time try to take in little snippets of the program owing to time constraints, but I know, given your background, Karen, that it is always one that is informed, and particularly when it comes to the economy. I don't know that there's anybody who holds a better cap than you to be able to talk about the economy, having had your experience. So this is really a pleasure for me to join you at this time in this program. As we get into the SRC report, I think it is probably a little bit important for people to understand where we are as a country, not just how we are viewed internationally, but there are certain measurements that you have international bodies incorporating when they look at our country. So for example, we may look at the ease of doing business. That is an accepted international standard, and it is not people who are abroad who are in factoring matters in abstract. What they are doing is they actually use a method by which they arrive at us being, well, at one point in time 50 and then 65, and well, Lord alone knows what number we are now, but we are not in a good place.
100 and something, early hundreds.
Yes. I wanted to talk about the rule of law index as an example before we get to SRC. What is the World Rule of Law Index? This is really a world justice project. This is an internationally acclaimed institution that measures our adherence to rule of law. Now, this is not rule of law in a strict sense of legal terminology, what we mean by rule of law. This actually, you have certain factors that they take into account. So, for example, they would measure and rank you on constraints on government powers, absence of corruption, open government, fundamental rights, order and security, regulatory enforcement, civil justice, criminal justice. So these are the main factors that they take into account, and they rank all Latin American countries. We are in that group, along with other CARICOM countries. Then you have the other countries, first world and otherwise. And at one point in time, and this is something that I always raise in the parliament and outside of parliament as well, because I think it's important to note that when you have these measurements, these assessments being made of our country, when they did the 2021 assessment, Trinidad and Tobago ranked 63 out of 139 countries. That was in 2021. Then you had this was pandemic times. And therefore what happened is that during the pandemic, it was accepted that countries may have fallen a little bit. But post-pandemic, it is still, quite astounding to see that Trinidad now ranks, and I'm talking about something that was released only about a month ago. This was in the last month that the World Justice Project, the Rule of Law Index, they found that we had dropped in our ranking and we went to 70 something out of 142. I think it's 71 out of 142. So can you imagine, just in a couple of years, we have dropped in rankings in at least 11 or 12 spots. And therefore, we now rank with some of the countries that really, you don't look to for any kind of standard. What does that mean for us? It simply means that when people are looking at us in terms of investment, when people are looking towards us in terms of a destination for travel, when people are looking towards Trinidad and Tobago, because we were once heralded as the tiger, right, of the Caribbean, when internally we have to look at what our rights are, even access to justice it is deteriorated, one has to question whether or not Trinidad and Tobago is in a good place. If it is not in a good place, then you have to look at what are the reasons for that. Why are we dropping in rankings? Is it coincidental that in the last 10 years, is it coincidental in the last decade that we had this sudden or drastic drop in rankings in these index? Is it just coincidental that, or is it anomalous? Is there something wrong, or is it coincidental, or is it that there is something to be linked in the last decade that we also have dropped substantially in ease of doing business and other performance indicators, corruption index? So we have to look at these things. So what has happened in the last 10 years that has now made us, right, from being a tiger in a sea of pussycats to now being, well, whatever they describe us now in CARICOM, right? We are no longer a leader, we are a follower. And why is it we are in this position? And that is where we have to look at now the 10 years. I am saying, and of course it is a political statement, the SRC is a politically sensitive issue. Whenever you have to increase salaries for office holders, that is always a political issue. But I don't know that you can just ascribe what I am going to say in this program now and the discussion as me wearing the cap of an opposition MP to say, well, he's just saying something that the opposition would want the population to hear. I want to really dive in depth into what exists in our society, and then we have to take and compare with that now. Why is it we are saying that office holders, top office holders, including the Prime Minister and his cabinet, are they entitled to the increase in salaries to the tune of what we are seeing? Moving from 50,
what are the two? Could you then, because I'm going to when you I want to just when I'm going to let you go through some of the increases to show the kind of increases, because you have to counterpoint that or juxtapose that against what is being offered to several unions, not only for this collective agreement period, but you're looking at periods for which they're going back to 2014, go back to 2011, and on top of which, where the cost of living, etc., has gone up. So how do you juxtapose? I want you to say that, because after you've said that, I actually did look at the Salary Review Commission report to look to see what factors they take into account in determining salaries. And when you have finished, because I think if I had to sort of, narrow it down, I think a lot of people are outraged to see the kinds of huge increases in public sector jobs at the same time, where you see people being told to take 0.02%, 3%, etc., etc. So how do you rationalize that? What is there?
What I've just asked my staff here to pull up the increases, but let's just use one for now to keep the discussion going. Salary increases for the top office holders of the country: President, Prime Minister, Cabinet, high-level government officials, you name them. The Prime Minister, let's take his. The Prime Minister's salary is going from $59,000 to $87,000. And then when you look at the time period for which the SRC is recommending the salary increase, it means that the Prime Minister is going to end up with approximately $1 million in back pay. That's one office holder. Now, again, I am saying that we have to look at this against the context of where we are in the last decade. The two time periods, when you look at it, it is comparable. What the SRC is recommending and what you're looking at performance now of the government and of the top office holders, the question arises, you mean to tell me that everything is falling apart, or at least it is deteriorating drastically, but for that same period or some comparable period of time, you are going to say that these top persons who are in charge are entitled to a salary increase of this amount, I think that $59,000 to $87,000 works up to something like 55%. But I'm getting it worked out now. I had it before, but I'll just pull it up. The point about it is that
47%, I think, is the amount. But anyway, go ahead.
so when you look at the persons who are listed there, yes, they are all office holders. The point I want to make is this. When this first arose, I believe it would have been in February or early March, Karen, when the SRC produced its report. I think that would have been labeled the 117th report. It was clear that the methodology, well, if at all there was methodology, we couldn't decipher it. We couldn't determine what was the rationale based on what the SRC had put forward. There was absolutely no basis upon which that report could have withstood scrutiny. And even the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance, but namely the Prime Minister, indicated that they themselves could not move forward with that SRC report, 117th report, and that was just mere months ago. I'm talking about February, March of 2024, and said that we are sending this back to the SRC because they have to tell us how they arrived at some of these determinations. What took place? When it came back to the 120th report now, which is what we are dealing with, what occurred? The numbers didn't really change, you know, Karen. All you saw was that they were already plugging some gaps. They were plugging the holes, and they were now finding rationale to justify what couldn't be justified before. Again, this shows that if at all there was methodology in it, we cannot make any sense out of that madness. And so I am of the view that this report cannot withstand scrutiny even at this point in time. So yes, we can talk about methodology and whether we think it is accurate and whether it is a fair assessment. But when it started off from the 117th version of the report, and all of a sudden, mere months later, you come and it is basically the same figures you are proposing, but you inject some kind of rationale, I am doubtful whether or not we can rely upon that as anything of substance, whether it can withstand scrutiny. And that is the problem I have for starters with the 120th report. The Prime Minister himself, which would have been last week Friday, indicated that he himself was unclear. Now I'm paraphrasing, but I did put out a release on it where I quoted his words. But he himself indicated that he was in doubt as to how they arrived at these figures. But whether they are fair or not, he was moving ahead to implement it. And this is where I think the real problem comes. If you want transparency and you want accountability in the highest office holders, it must be that they are satisfied and they must be able to show the population that they themselves can justify why it is they are entitled to the salary increases. And that is what they cannot do. If you take, for example, the fact that in 2016, 2017 onwards till now, you would have had 3 negotiating periods for public servants and other workers, whether they belong to the port, whether they belong to private sector. You would have had 3 negotiating periods. What do I know you know what I mean by this, but for the ordinary person, what do we mean by this? Collective agreements usually have a life. And if you have a trade union representing you, you as the worker, you belong to a bargaining unit. As part of the bargaining unit, your shop steward, your trade union representative, they will negotiate on your behalf. And so what they do is they negotiate with the employer and they come up with an agreement, terms and conditions, wages, COLA, salary, what have you, and that will usually span a period of time, 3 years. So what happens is that you will agree, this is what is going to be paid for this 3-year period. During that 3-year period, or just after the 3-year period, what is expected is that you will continue negotiating again for the new period. Where people are in the country right now, generally, not just a small portion of the society, generally, no matter where you work, there are 2 negotiating periods which they have to consider in the rearview mirror. In other words, 2 collective bargaining periods are outstanding. And right now they have to negotiate for where they are presently. So it means that a lot of workers have not gotten paid for periods that they have been ought to be determined, and periods they ought to have gotten either back pay or it's simpliciter, some kind of determination of what wage and salary they should have gotten. So this is the majority of the population. This is why, and I'm not taking anybody's side, but again, look at what has happened with Port Authority. I am not saying that the Port Authority, the trade union, SWWTU is right. I am not saying that the port workers are right. I am not saying that the Port Authority is right. I'm saying that that is a classic example of where, according to them, there is no dispute that there was a framework agreement for 2015, and look where we are now, 2024. That itself shows the three-span period that I'm talking about. If you were to break it down, that they have not had settled terms and conditions and wages all along the way. But that is for the general population. But lo and behold, for the upper echelons of the society and of the working class, they now have a lot of back pay to collect. And it is not a small sum of money. So how does the Prime Minister stand up and tell the rest of the country, listen, I have no difficulty, and bearing in mind, if I don't expect the Prime Minister to get down in the trenches, there's a Minister of Labour. There's a Minister of Labour who, whenever there's a dispute, the Minister of Labour is duty-bound under the Industrial Relations Act to somehow get involved in those negotiations, summon the parties, and try to have conciliation at the Ministry of Labour level under the auspices of the Minister of Labour, and you try to settle these things, and then it follows a process where it may eventually reach before the courts. And if it reaches before the courts, there's a determination. So how is it that you are able to tell people that you have to go through a system if you intend to fight for your wages, but we at the top don't need to go through that system? We can just have a report. Yes, it is something sanctioned in law. I am not saying otherwise. But you are telling these other people, we can just proceed quickly enough, and we can't justify the rationale for it. But because it stands in law that the SRC can just give a report, we are entitled to just run with that, while the rest of you have to fight either before the Minister of Labour or, failing that, go before the courts. And we all know what happens when it goes before the courts.
I want to make a few comments to what you have said.
Yeah.
Number one, I think with all due respect, because I have done a little bit of industrial relations myself, and we do know that many collective agreements, which can span up to 5 years, but it's 3 years is really the period, as you rightly said, and it has to be registered and all of that. But we do know that it is almost a practice that one talks about back pay, because the collective agreement period has expired, but the terms and conditions that applied under that will continue until a new agreement is entered into. So my concern is really not so much as the fact that they have allowed a situation in the private sector or in the state enterprises. Why that is a problem, the problem that it creates is that the country has no money now. And I can go through those figures that I'm not right away, but we could certainly go through the data that supports that. It's not made up, Go to Central Bank, go to CSO.
Yes.
That is it.
So Karen, not to interject to interrupt you, it may be worth getting into the figures, but you are right. That is another aspect of the argument. I have taken it from a semi-pure technical point of view.
Right.
But when we look at crime crisis, you're talking about police stations in this day and age still seeking all the help of members of parliament and even members of the public. We are dealing with extortion. I think the news, one of the major news stations, media entities, they're going to run an exclusive on extortion in Trinidad right now. And one of the issues that arose in it, I'm aware, because the business community has really kicked a big fuss about it, and rightfully so. They indicated that there was a particular situation where the business that was extorted, if I may use that as a verb, right? The secretary employed in that business had to go behind a computer in the police station and type up their own statement, right? Because the police officers were not prepared to do it, and they lacked resources. So, I mean, imagine we are there. So we are talking about we don't have money for basic resources. We are talking about criminals running rampant in this country. We are talking about foreign exchange crisis, something that I know you are much more versed than most of us in terms of analyzing it and breaking it down. The economy is threatening to grind to a halt because small businesses, SMEs, are being starved of the foreign exchange. We are talking about, we just spoke about the industrial activity on the port, and there is an industrial activity which might translate into unrest.
Also with that,
yeah,
it's 002.
Yeah, in other parts of the country, you have multiple crises occurring in schools. So you're right, we don't, all of these are signs of the fact that even if we have the money, which clearly the government doesn't have right now, if they do, they are not prioritizing it properly, which is, bad fiscal management. But yet you are able to come to the conclusion that, listen, we are able to pay these people these monies. And you have some armchair intellectual, technical politicians who are able to say, well, listen, if not now, when? When will we do it?
So let me just go to that point, okay? Because I think it's important that people know this. When you're looking, and I'm going to use 3 examples, and maybe you will use them because people love to use Singapore, because you know that ministers in Singapore are paid, an equivalent in our money, at least in millions of dollars. They are paid that. So, and they have one of the most successful, most productive economies in the world, coming from 1965 as a small fishing village. It was a British colonial holding, and then what is the leader? I always forget how to pronounce his name. Kim Young. I cannot do not know why I have so much trouble saying this gentleman's name. But the point I want to make first is you mentioned how would they reach it. There are 2 things I want to say. My understanding, first of all, the Prime Minister has told us, we the people of Trinidad and Tobago, who pay their salaries. You see, it's not like the private sector, where salaries are determined by the profit margin that these companies enjoy. So if the companies are doing well and they're profiting and they're expanding, it's going to be reflected in the dividends they pay shareholders. If they are publicly traded, if they're privately owned, it's going to be reflected in their salaries. And their salaries bear no resemblance at all to the salaries of the persons at the lower end, because they are the ones that are making the company succeed. They are the ones that are bringing in the money for the company. They are the ones that are allowing the company to expand. They are the ones hopefully allowing, usually they focus on dividends, but let's say they expand and create employment, right? So a private sector employee is going to be profit driven. And in order to attract those persons, you've got to get the best and the brightest. And the best and the brightest won't come. You can't attract and you can't keep them unless you are able to provide them with something that is comparable to the private sector. So I just want to, let me deal with the Salary Review Commission point first, and then I just want to deal with the one that they use as the glaring example. So you see, look at how much the salaries that the ministers in Singapore enjoy. So the Salary Review Commission is a creature of statute. It was created under Section 140 of the Constitution. Guess who appoints the members of the Salary Review Commission? They're the chairman and 4 members. The president. Guess who appoints that president? The Prime Minister.
Yes.
Then the Prime Minister and the other member, he appoints, that is the president, after consultation with guess who? The Prime Minister and the opposition leader. Himself to himself. So they are alone to cause one to be worried if one is using, and by the way, they're being paid from the consolidated fund. This is the taxpayers' fund. That's why there always has to be a cap. If you are in private sector and you work for Apple or one of those big, or Elon Musk or whoever you want to call, where or Amazon with Jeff Bezos and so on, the sky's the limit, because you are making the money based on the shareholder investment in your business. You are being paid, you in the public service are being paid by me. You are being paid out of the consolidated fund. The consolidated fund is taxpayers' funds. So they have to put a cap on your salary. You understand? They have to cap it, because the cap has to be there, because there's so much that you can be given. That's number 1. Number 2, the Salary Review Commission, which is appointed by the president, who has to recommend, who the Salary Review Commission appointed as a chairman, 4 members, they have to make a recommendation if you should increase her salary too. And they did. They increased the Prime Minister's salary. I have it here. You were right about his own, everybody. That was the one from 59,680 to over 87,000. Her salary, that is the president's salary, from 64,000. So she was making more than he. So it probably wasn't looking too good. So now she's making 81,000, right? And then there is, and let me just make it clear. Section 141, so it's himself, which is a good argument if you were talking straight politics. Another example, just like the Auditor General, another example why the president should not be appointed by the president, because she's already been appointed by the Prime Minister. She's already been appointed by a politician. And that goes to any government I'm talking about. And here again, worse yet, to decide how much money I should get, how much money you should pay me, I am deciding. Yes, and the Prime Minister is deciding, in effect, who should be the chairman and who should be the 4 members of the committee. They divided in Section 141. They do give you guidelines. They do give you guidelines. And they have divided it into Part 1 and Part 2. Most of it falls on Part 1. And I think the reason why, which the Prime Minister wasn't being clear on, after he tell us, tighten your belt, things hard. You're going to have to go through a hard time. You're hearing Dr. Roger, I mean no offense, the top economist saying that the cost of food has gone up 43% since 2020. These are people who have to eat, right? So you are himself to himself, as far as I'm concerned. So they divided. I went to the commission to read it to see. So I know just talk.
Yes.
It's Part 1. And I think the reason why it went back and why it didn't have many changes was because the judiciary rightfully said that you cannot use the same markers or the same determinants or the same performance indicators. They're not exactly the same as you use for people who are politicians. Because the judiciary, I mean, to become a judge, you have to be a lawyer in the first place. You have to be a lawyer at least for 10 years. You have to have a certain record. There are things that you have to come to the job with. When you become a member of parliament, what you have to come with? What is no offense? I mean, you are a lawyer, I'm a lawyer, but what you have to come with? You know, so I think he said that the tax appeal board, there are certain positions, Auditor General, they are clear, so there is a division, and I think that's why they sent it back. He didn't say that to you all, you know. That's why there's very little change, because the change really was for those officers. But when it came to Part 2, you know who's in Part 2? Only 3 sets of people in Part 2. Members of Parliament, the THA, and local government bodies. And they do have guidelines. They do have guidelines, because and they weight it. I want to know how they're weighting it. They benchmark. They benchmark against what's happening outside in the private sector, right? And of course, that I could talk about a little bit, but this is the 2 ones that I want to mention, that they say that they benchmark it against. No, weighting is a different thing. They benchmark it against, they measure against appropriate differences in compensation. They look at that, remuneration with current heads in private sector. That's what they could do. You know where they could do that? They could do that in Singapore. And I could say why. But this is what they benchmark to, the general levels of adjustment that were made to compensation in the wider community since the last review, and the economic and financial development in the country. Those are the benchmarks that in the Salary Review Commission report, they have about 5 benchmarks. And you are going to tell me that you have a Minister of Finance telling Wiggott that take 5% or nothing, and 0.02, and everybody's 3%. But you don't have a problem with getting an increase of 60-something, 40-something% when the economy and the financial situation in the country is terrible, where people are losing jobs and closing down businesses. The only ones that not close down businesses is the wealthy of the wealthy of the wealthy, right? What are you using and how are you weighting in 2024 in terms of determining what that benchmark should be? Because you put it in your report that those are things that you'd consider, but you could not be considering that to come up with that report. You know what that reminds me of? I can't remember her name, but I know it was Louis XIV, the Sun King. When his wife said, "Let them eat cake." You see, that is the problem.
I'm not sure. I believe that might be Mary Antoinette.
Marie Antoinette. So
If they can't have bread, let them eat cake.
let them eat cake. But you see what that really means and why it has survived. And I'm just going to say one thing about it, and I will hand back over to you, because as you see, I'm passionate about it, as you are. But I decided, given the amount of effort you put into doing your research, and I would like you to talk about different public and private and so on, because of the effort I saw you put, and I saw David Abdullah himself tell the Prime Minister mash breaks, right? They themselves say that's what they must take into account. But God have mercy, if you are taking that into account, all they should be fired. Because if you were working in the private sector, none of you would have a job. None of y'all would have a job.
That is correct.
If I have to mark you against your performance, because they say there are three, they look at how they use 3 stages. The final one will be results. But my God, sorry, I don't mean any offense, but I just read yesterday in the papers that the murder rate for Trinidad, as of yesterday, it was in the Guardian, was 562 compared to 526 last year. You doing a good job? And I have the figures. After the energy sector, it is in a mess. After the economy, it is in a mess. All of y'all should be fired. All of y'all get a salary increase. All of y'all should not be there. All of y'all, if you want to use benchmark against the private sector, none of all you would have a job. And that brings me to my one little point before I hand it back to you. By the way, Prime Minister Holness, they say you don't have any choice that you do. Yes, you do, because a motion was led by the Minister of Finance, which has not been debated. And you can debate it and decide whether you would accept it or not. And Prime Minister Holness in Jamaica, who did not take the increase. He did not take the increase. If all the rest, let them did the increase, all public servants, they let them take the increase. He did not take the increase. Lead by example, no man. Lead by example. You have no example at all. You're trying to blame it on the 117th report, and it was a mistake. It was because the judiciary, and then he said the judiciary said threatening to. I don't know if you missed that, but he said the judiciary threatened to take him to court. It was over that. They were saying that you were lumping them with the part 2, they divided. If you go to the report, you will see the introduction, right? Using any excuse to take the money. Any excuse to take money. I just want to say one last thing, and then I will just hand it over to you. When you're talking about, when you look at Singapore, which is about, I went and read it, there are 581 square kilometers, and Tobago is 200 kilometers. So Tobago is half the size, or less than half the size, but their population is 5 million, right? But number one, do you know what their number one reason for success they give? Meritocracy. You hear what it is? Why their government has succeeded. They have no natural resources, zero natural resources. And in fact, they said when the British government gave them their independence in 1965, the public service was rife with corruption. He said the number one problem he had to deal with was the level of corruption in the public service that they inherited from the British colonial government. Yes, those bastions of correctness. And he said meritocracy was the key to his success, because the practice in the civil service and in the politics and in business and in the schools enabled Singapore to achieve excellence to compete against others. Lee Kuan Yew, in his memoirs at page 735 to 736, talked about the importance of leadership. This is what he had to say. He said, my experience in Asia has led me to conclude that we need good men to have good government. However, good the system of government, bad leaders will bring harm to the people. The single decisive factor that made for Singapore's development was the ability of its ministers and high quality of civil servants who supported them. He said it was important because they had the constraints of geography, natural resources, and so on. And again, in I think the World Bank said they ranked Singapore number 1 in government effectiveness in 2016, the most effective because of favorable policies and emphasis on meritocracy and training, which resulted in high level of competence and implementing of policies, and also what they call clean government. Do hide benefits, you know, they like to hide benefits. But what I am saying to you, he understood the people who sitting down in their government, unlike the ones sitting down in our government. If we have to judge them by the results that we see, they get the best and the brightest. They attract the best and brightest, and they retain them. They pay them and they discount it by about 40%, because if you're coming into government, I ask you, why are you choosing to come into government? So if you are choosing to come into government, it cannot just be money. You want to do service. So we understand you are making a sacrifice. So understanding you are making a sacrifice, and nevertheless, we can't pay you the same thing as if you win private. So they use 6 companies, 6 top performing companies, and they discounted the salaries by 40% to represent the sacrifice that you will be making in order to give service and to have the honor to serve your country. So when people want to use Singapore as an example, understand that when Tim you took over, his number one thing that created success for his country was putting emphasis on meritocracy and being willing to get the best and the brightest and to attract and retain. You cannot say that about Trinidad and Tobago. So stop comparing. So stop the benchmarking. Because when you want a benchmark against countries that are doing as bad as we are.
Now, Karen, I am very happy with how you have articulated it, because there's not much for me to say. I would really say your points, but you are right. Let us start with this fundamental point that I think even I saw, maybe it was Dr. Terence Farrell and a couple others saying that in this day and age you can't be paying a prime minister the kind of monies he's getting now. And they are referring to these, Singapore and Japan, and if I may say loosely, Scandinavian countries. But you are right. The truth of the matter is that Japan and Singapore, they recruit. This is not challenged, you know, because when they do recruit people to hold ministerial positions, these persons are accepted within the business sector and the various circles of the discipline that they belong to. They are accepted as being the best and the brightest. And that is why you pay them handsomely there. That is number one. So you're right, meritocracy, they are the best and the brightest. And this is something I had said in my letter to the editor, because I wanted to make that point. Their appointments and wages, I had made the point that they are enmeshed in an environment where you have institutional architecture of accountability. So we are talking benchmarks. We are using that term loosely, benchmarks here. But they have a system. It is scientific by how they are going to judge your performance. And if you are not performing, you are out. So we can't say that we should somehow be paid like these ministers out there in Singapore and Japan, but we don't want the accountability which they are scrutinized under. And they have in their system a series, a compendium of laws, and that compendium of laws which they have in these countries, if you are caught, as we say in local parlance, dipping your hand in the cookie jar, the consequences are very serious for you. It's not just life imprisonment, it could be far worse. We don't have that in our culture. We don't have that in our laws. So we don't even touch white-collar criminals in Trinidad and Tobago. They go through the system, whether they are charged with, bid rigging or conspiracy or to commit fraud of the highest order. You name it, they just go through the system. And by the time it is determined, the matter is determined maybe 10 to 15 years, because you know matters will go all the way to the Court of Appeal, the Privy Council, on interlocutory matters. For those who don't understand that, meaning on procedural matters, before you actually get down into the substance of the case, the actual trial. When the trial is finished, then that is appealed, and you have a whole system that it goes through. And that is what does not obtain in those countries, which is why in those countries, these persons, when you pick on the basis of meritocracy, you have no difficulty paying them the kind of monies that you do, because number one, they are worth it. they could garner it in the private sector, in what they would call their private sector. And number two, that whole environment in which they work, there is an institutional compendium of laws to deal with crimes. We have nothing like that in Trinidad and Tobago. We're still fighting over how they water down the procurement legislation in Trinidad and Tobago, let alone you want to talk about what laws we have to deal with corrupt politicians. So it's chalk and cheese. So when I hear people making the point that you can't be paying a prime minister this wage in this day and age, that is really something that you are not assessing properly. The SRC did not assess it properly. But I want to make one point, which is in fairness to the judiciary. And I will deal with this. I don't want to disclose too much on it at this point because, Karen, I am having a press conference tomorrow. And in my press conference, there are a few matters of national importance that I want to touch on tomorrow morning. I want to say at this point in time that I want to be fair to the judiciary. When I was an industrial court judge back in 2013 or thereabouts, SRC, they were entertaining. What had happened was because of the fact that you had successive SRC reports coming out recommending increases and in some cases not recommending increases, there was felt to be lack of parity even amongst tribunals versus the High Court. Now, we could argue what obtains in the High Court and the qualifications and the kind of level of work they have to do there, as opposed to those that occupy tribunals. But that's a discussion we can have another time. The point is that there was a feeling that there should be a level of parity to show how critical the institutions are to the running of the country. It may not be the High Court, but it is still a court or a superior court of record and should be treated as such. And we can debate that separately. When that whole issue arose, what happened was, I know since then, the judiciary, they were proactive in engaging consultants and representatives, otherwise, legal and otherwise, to make representations to the SRC, making their case why. So they were putting forward methodology, which the SRC was having the work done for them. So in the category of the judiciary, I don't know what is this talk about threatening legal action. Because if they wanted to take legal action, they could have taken it more than a decade ago. That has absolutely no bearing on what is taking place now. It is an absolute red herring, and it points to something else which I will touch on tomorrow. I don't want to touch on it now because I wouldn't be able to do justice to it in your program. So forgive me for not touching on it deeper at this point in time, but to simply say that it was a clear red herring. The Prime Minister didn't say that when he had his press conference on Friday. He said, listen, the lawyers, the SRC has to do X, Y, and Z. They have done it. I accept it. Full stop. I am not too sure about the methodology and whether or not it's fair, we're going ahead. When asked by one of the reporters, hey, are you going to take this to Parliament to be debated? His attitude was, well, what debate are you talking about? It's finished. This is how it operates. Once we agree to it, that's it. It's deemed to be implemented. There's no debate. And he moved on. Where did any talk come about? Well, people were threatening legal action. But I think what happened, Karen, was that I say he respectfully, the Prime Minister did not anticipate the level of backlash that he would have gotten within less than a 24-hour period that would have now compelled him to have to find an excuse or a red herring to say, hey, you see all what I tell you before I go further with this thing, understand my plight. I was laboring under some kind of threat. I mean, since when the government cares about a threat of legal action?
Anybody believes that? Anybody believes that? They don't realize they have lost. But we could start with so many things. Paria, the AV drilling, the FUL thing, the mining license, the Inez Gate. We could go on and on and on and on. Whether or not they are valid or not, they have lost the trust of the government. I just want to say one thing. I was not attacking the judiciary. Yeah? Let me make that very, very
I know that.
No, but I want the judiciary to know that I was not.
Yes.
That's what I am trying to do. What I'm trying to do is the Prime Minister is a politician of 50 years standing. He knows the art of deflection. He knows the way to say something that is going to hopefully get people off going down a rabbit hole and forget about the real problem, right? So I understood. He said that, oh, he better do this because the judiciary might challenge him with illegal action. All right. Now he knew because I went and looked it up. It's because they obviously say you cannot put us in the same box, because they actually put in the commission report part 1 and part 2. And part 1 has the industrial court, has the high court, and the public,
Yes.
all those senior public servants in there, and just 3 in part 2. MPs, THA, and the last one. So he knew that. But what he was doing was playing smart with stupidness, because he is the same man that's telling you, tighten your belt, hard times are on. We wait
Yes.
until 2028, things will get better. We know hard, we know it's this, but oh God, you have to take the hard time. You telling me, and by the way, let me just say, you see, United States of America, I was shocked. I went and, just doing a little bit of research on it. So go back just one thing to the judiciary. Yes, they are right. Do not compare them, because they are just not one factor. There are 5. That's how the weighting is, the weighting you put in, because it is true that our judges make more than the judges in the other islands. It is true. I know that as a fact, right? Without even looking it up.
But Karen, not to stop you there, but just to stick the pin to point out that we are the most litigious country in the.
I know. I'm not taken away at all. I just want to say that the benchmarking point now, because you remember they have guidelines, so you can choose the one that you want to choose, and the one that Dr. Farrell choosing is benchmarking. But what you forgetting to talk about, what it's supposed to look at is the economic and financial development in the country. Why you don't talk about that? When you talk about that, they should get nothing. Next thing, if you really want to talk about that, why don't you talk about the general levels of adjustment that were made in compensation in the wider community since the last year? Why you don't talk about that? How many people out of jobs? How many people didn't get any salary increases? How many people instead of working 5 days, working 3 days? How many people instead of getting 8 hours, getting 5 hours? Why you don't talk about that? But you're conveniently forgetting that and talking about benchmarking. I can't take, you see, this is where people don't have confidence, because you're talking through, because when you talk and you're sounding so intellectual and so educated and so above, let's talk about it to this level, benchmarking. Yes, that is what Singapore did. But when Singapore did that, let me tell you, they only got the best and the brightest in the private sector. And that is what they said. And they have what they call a clean wage policy. China, only 50 years ago, look where China is, the best and the brightest. Can you say that we have, because most of the MPs are made ministers. I'm not about talking any minister, but I have to say that if I had to judge you and you came to me as your boss, and I went to look to see how you perform in your various areas of responsibilities with all the challenges that come with it, I'm going to say, but you're only doing a bad job. Only doing a real bad job. And I could go on with the economy, because they say, look at the thing. So don't come and tell me about benchmarking and using Singapore and that in vacuum. Don't give me those examples to the people as, in vacuum, look at what they're doing in Singapore. Singapore was forced to do it because Singapore didn't have oil and gas. Singapore had nothing. Singapore had the corruption was so rife that they inherited. That is what he said in his book, that the only way he could deal with it, well, we have corruption, and we know we have corruption. We high up on the corruption index anyhow, so it's not just me saying that, right? So when they're talking about measuring us, so coming back to the president of the United States, it's over 300 something million people living in United States of America, right? When is the last time the president of the United States, the last time, 20 years ago, it was 20 years ago in 20 years ago, in 2020, was the first time after 20 years that the president of the United States, the most powerful country in the world, you want to talk about responsibility, you want to talk about, that is when the first time he got a salary increase from 200,000 with the 50,000 non-tax, and But he lived in the White House, so he'd have to pay for the White House. But then he got it. It's now 400,000. The most powerful country, 20 years. Why you benchmark against that? Why you benchmark against that?
Karen, two things, and you are right. You know,
Yeah, but also remark by Colin Smith. I don't want Colin Smith just to say, because I don't want people to say we ignore him. We tell them we want them to be. So can we just quickly say some of the things? I don't know if it's good, I don't know if it's bad. I'm going to read some and then I hand it over to you. Correct is right, my lady. Okay, but that wasn't bad. Thank you. I don't know what I was correct and right about, but I'm glad you thought so. The public servants is only dry bone right through suffering for the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. PNM and evil government. The PNM, they're wicked. They're real wicked in my view, you know. No, they're real wicked. How you could do that? How you could sleep at night knowing that, boy? I really don't understand that too. And I was in government, and I'm telling you, it is wrong. Right? And you could say I could say that because I'm not there, but I know I would think so. But plus Patrick Manning wouldn't have agreed to it. And next he said, and they want to give a 4%. Mad people is governing more than ever before. We are right by now to get rid of the PNM out of office for general elections. Other countries have got them out long ago. Yeah, why don't we feel we can? You know, I just want to say this one thing. I just want to say this one thing, and I really will hand it over to you. I think, you know, maybe I did not study political science. I did do international relations, and I did do my MBA because I found law so rigid and so restrictive, you know, and I wanted to expand myself, right? My knowledge base. And one of the things I know, either from reading or my own whatever, is why you don't have to follow what A country or B country does, right? You have to be willing to look at your circumstances and do what is right for your country. Yes, you could use them. You're not going to reinvent the wheel, but you're going to do what is right for you. So to come to argue with me, to tell me what X is doing, you can tell me what X is doing if what is going on in X country is going to help to do what? What does the citizen want? The citizen wants to be able to walk down Arapita Avenue and not get shot. The citizen wants not to have all these people from Colombia or Venezuela. Yes, set up them nearly every a week pass where you do not hear about going in within some club. Come on, tell me I'm not telling the truth. A week pass before you hear somebody or apparently of Venezuelan origin was involved in some murder, right? A week pass. This is what we're dealing with in this country. What are we dealing with? We have to look at our circumstances and do what is right for us. That is what Singapore did. That's what Japan did. That's what China did. Why don't we have the courage to stand up and say what is right for us and not just be a nation of sheep, as V.S. Naipaul called us? Right? Why do we have to sit down there and talk, they benchmark against America? I mean, benchmark against it. Of course, you could use benchmarking, but their circumstances are not yours, and you know it. But even when you're saying it, you know it.
Yes. Just 2 points I'll make quickly.
No, you could go take your time because I fired up enough. I say enough.
No, I'm glad you are fired up because I am tired, and I'm glad that you bring in this team because this is a very important issue. I'm looking at an article now, 18th of September 2018, not that long ago, you know. And this is where the title, Bill Introduced to Freeze MPs' Pay. This was the Right Honorable Jacinda Ardern. A bill to freeze the pay of MPs for 1 year will be introduced into the parliament today, says Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and Workplace Relations and Safety Minister Ian Lees Galloway.
Which country are you talking about?
This is New Zealand. This is the former.
Oh, I know that can't be Trinidad.
Right.
I know you're not talking about Trinidad.
Definitely not Trinidad. But listen to what they said. The government is focusing on lifting incomes for ordinary working Kiwis, sharing New Zealand's prosperity more fairly. This was what the Prime Minister said then. MP salaries have risen at a rate that is out of proportion with wage growth of most New Zealanders. Since the current system of determining MP remuneration was changed in 2015. So today's bill will put a freeze on salaries and allowances while we develop a fairer formula for future pay increases. So they looked at the comparison of the wage growth of those who would be MPs and the upper echelons versus the rest of the country. and they decided that, listen, they're not going ahead with must be fair. I use that as one article. Do you know on these same countries that we want to talk about and why it is we should be paid in somehow comparison with these MPs in these other countries? I believe it is New Zealand as well, which I remember. I'll ask them to find the article
they're
now.
very, very respected in the international community, yeah? New Zealand.
The Prime Minister, and they're looking for the article, I distinctly remember this, the Prime Minister said none of the ministers would be entitled to a chauffeur. They will all have to use public transportation. That is what you call leading by example. And in a time like this where you are talking about crime, not you, but I mean, we are all talking about crime out of control and the deteriorating economic conditions of the country. Our basic standard of living has well gone below the poverty line. How do you intend to lead by example? How do you intend to engender trust in your population? How is it that you keep people at a point where they understand that, listen, even if according to you we must tighten our belts because we're really going through a hard patch. I'm just saying, even if you want to convince the population of that, how can you expect people to place trust in you when you say tighten your belts, but you really taking a big fat pay raise?
87%, I think it's 87% increase. I have it right here. Somebody sent me the data, you know. Somebody sent me data for all of them. And but you worked it out already, I think, right? You said that for some of them.
Yeah, I have my team looking at it still to see.
Yeah, but I mean, it's huge percentage. And who is deciding that? He's saying that's what the Salary Review Commission. Give me a break. The president is appointed by you, and the president is the who appoints the Salary Review Commission after a consultation with you and the opposition leader. So she's not. It's himself to himself. Don't you understand? That is why in a lot of countries that they now say a president should be elected by the people. There are mechanisms to doing that because it's something is unseemly about you say distancing yourself from what the SRC does, but yet the same you have a hand in the persons who sit on the Salary Review Commission. I mean, this is a kind of a replay in a way. You're looking at the investigation. It's not the same thing, but it just tells you the kind of level of distrust that they have engendered in the population. And you setting up an investigation, I'm not taking sides. And by the way, when the person criticizes to go to 2020, I am not taking her side. But she wasn't the Auditor General in 2020. She was the Auditor General in 2023. So if she's going back to 2020, maybe she has concerns about 2020. What is wrong with that? You're doing it slow. She doing, and then she getting paid, and they're getting paid $100,000. She not getting any money. Stop giving people in prison and the money coming in her hand. I can't, this is the kind of thing I can't take. And then he's talking about this investigative committee that Lady Simla had to say, but why the Minister of Finance not part of this investigative committee? Then he shut down that illegal quarrying where they say they're taking aggregates. That is your aggregates they're taking, I don't think you understand that, and then selling it back to you. Right? And then the same Minister of Energy gave the son of the very good friend of the Prime Minister, he has never denied it, gave him a license to go in that same Waterloo to go and do quarrying. So you don't see something not right? So when you come and tell me that when the SRC make a decision, and it's not me that made a decision, it's they made a decision, and it is not true, according to David Abdullah, the paper say, he said, the finance minister, Colin Limburg, laid on the 120th SRC report in the House of Representatives November the 15th. There's a motion filed in Imbert's name on the House's order paper to approve the report. That motion has not been debated. Let's hear the views of everyone, because they have said that they have no choice but to accept it. Well, this is what, I don't know. What I'm trying to say is I don't even know who to believe, who not to believe, because you just can't. And when you don't have faith and confidence in no matter what the relationship is, whether it is your family relation, your work relations, your personal relationship, when that faith and confidence is destroyed, ask anybody that knows anything about relations, it is very hard for me to look at it and say, I wonder how much of it is true. That is not how it should be. That should not any Prime Minister come in and using a red herring about the judiciary. Judiciary study they're going to sue. They're just using that. I didn't hear the judiciary say they're going to sue. I think the judiciary thought, from what I'm assuming, that is saying that they are in a separate category and therefore they need to be assessed differently from an MP and so on. That's what I think, and therefore
Yes.
that's what I think it was. So
Now,
by the way, so I want you to history and all those who fall into that category of part one. I am not criticizing them at all. I just say the Prime Minister trying to think of what, let me see how I can get out of this. Let me see how I can get out of this thing. Well, I already said domestic violence. I can't tell you to bring it in bed. So I already deal with that. As after and then the crime. That's why he's no longer Minister of National Security. Yes, they can say what they want. The tired ask them to move him. That's the one good thing you do. You got it's too much. You have to get rid of him, right? When it's that he have the bold faces to tell you responsible for your crime. So what you doing there then? I telling you, if the SRC was really doing its job and waiting according to the circumstances that prevail in 2024, then in doing that, you've got to look if you're going to give people much more money, much money, and tell others that they must save 2% and 3%, where you are running deficit after deficit after deficit. So let me start with the financial thing because I'll let you talk. But if you want me to fill you in, if they were looking at that, all of them might say, ministers, you're already getting a good salary compared to the rest of the country. So I think you shouldn't even ask anything. You should say, no, we will stay where we are in solidarity with our country and our citizens who are suffering right now. Until we bring the money that you say you're getting from Dragon for you.
Karen, I just want to point out again, this is another article which supports the point. I mean, we are discussing this and very passionately. Other countries have had to pass through this, and I like your point, which is when we look at the structure of the SRC and how recommendations are made, and we are talking about appointment of the persons leading to them making recommendations for the said persons who appointed them. Essentially, it is himself to himself. In England, for example, what you have is you have what is called an independent parliamentary standards authority.
Okay.
An independent parliamentary standards authority, IPSA.
What points them?
What do? They are the watchdog that sets parliamentary salaries. And a little more than 2 years ago, the president, who has now taken the mantle of prime ministership of Britain, of England, Keir Starmer, he had made a recommendation a little bit more than 2 years ago to say that given the severe cost of squeeze that the general public was facing in England at that point in time, that MPs' basic pay should have been frozen. And that was actually justified by IPSA, that independent authority. And he said that, this is what he said, I think that MPs do not need a pay rise, and we should all be saying that we don't need that pay rise, and it shouldn't go ahead. And he accepted, he said the mechanism is independent, but I think it's for me, as a leader of the opposition, to say that I do not think we should have that pay rise. It is just that simple. As a leader, if you are holding a leadership position, to me, that is what you are expected to do. You lead by example. And if all of the factors are pointing to your country, your people going through severe hardship, why is it that in their time of greatest need, would you say, okay, I am comfortable, I can accept a fat pay increase? It just does not happen in a real country.
Who's independent? Who appoints in it? Because you know the word independent is bandied around. And by the way, there's somebody who said to you, if you feel so strongly about it, why are you I lost it now? Oh, if you don't want a salary increase, that's up to you. You see, you help people. You see, this is the thing. Wait, no, let him finish.
Yeah.
Why should others be denied their rightfully earned money? You hear that? You hear that? Rightfully earned money. You see why you can't?
No, but you see, people have to look at this. This is really, to me, this is a non-partisan issue. This is not a party political issue.
No, it is not.
This is an issue of bread and butter. That is how simple this issue is, but yet how far-reaching it could be for the entire Trinidad and Tobago. So it doesn't matter. Of course, I want a salary, but if I hold a representative position, I belong to the legislative arm of the country. I am a member of the parliament. I must lead by example. So I must drive around in some Porsche vehicle and have salary that I could go and hang out on evenings and have dinners and do whatever. I'm just saying I could choose to use this money. By the way, the money is about $3,000 for opposition MPs.
Yeah.
Right. So if they want me to take the $3,000,
yeah, but that's not the point. That's not the point. Don't even let them. Don't let them take you down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, that is a really. I don't want to get distracted with that, but just to make the point, that is really not what this issue is about. I do feel strongly about it, and which is why I am on the public record as saying that if I am going to object to this strongly, which I intend to over a prolonged period of time, whatever, if it is implemented, I'm telling Prime Minister Rowley to hold his hands on that and don't go down that road.
Yeah, but because I'm telling you.
I already, because I'm going to be transparent with it as well, I already have NGO organizations who are reputable in the country that I have agreements with them, or I shouldn't use the word agreement. It sounds too formal, like it's a legal transaction. I just have an arrangement where it will be handed over to them. And that is just to show, no, we have to lead by example. But I want to get back to something.
Can I just say what Holness said?
Yes.
Because you were talking about leadership, right?
Please.
And how he didn't take the salary. This is what he said, and we talk about leadership, right? He said, this is actually quoting him, so I might have started exactly in the right place. He said, the Prime Minister's statement of why declining his salary. This is in keeping with the long-established principle of government of Jamaica that persons paid from the consolidated fund, that's the taxpayers, yes, you're paying for it, no, not the investors, right? Shall only receive the salaries regardless of the number of discrete jobs and functions they perform. He decided to show symbolically and truthfully. He decided to show symbolically and truthfully that he understands the public backlash over the levels and timing of the increase for members of the political directorate. I will not accept a salary increase granted to me within the public sector compensation review, stating as a leader, he has to show solidarity. He has to show solidarity with those experiencing economic hardship. You heard that, Mr. Dr. Rowley? That's why. Guess who are the leaders in the Caribbean? That's the truth. Tell the truth. The truth is Mia Motley, Prime Minister Holness, and in Guyana, Dr. Ali. Those are the three leaders. Do you ever hear them want to have a meeting in Trinidad? They don't want to have a meeting in Trinidad. And when they have a meeting in Trinidad, it's about something to do with something that they're leading in. You have lost credibility. You have lost this confidence and trust, not only of, in my respectful opinion, except for those hard and fast, who will see nothing but nothing, who will see nothing beyond that blinkers that they put on, but face the facts. Why is it that Mia Motley has the respect? Why does Holness, who got himself in trouble, by the way, the other day with some issues, but the fact of the matter is, why is Dr. Ejjan Ali, when he stood up and said when they came, some family of some former Prime Minister of England, in the days, slavery days, he was owned slaves, and when a slave tried to run away, he put the head of that slave, killed them, and put the head of his slave on a stake. And along the roadway, you would see the heads of those things to tell you, you do that, that will happen to you. And he said to them, I was so proud of that man. He said, thank you for your apology. But where's the money? All of y'all get compensated for when you lost your slaves. You know that they got compensated when they lost their slaves. But we must say thank you, Jesus, and that's enough. And I was so proud of that man for taking a position, not against a country. We're talking about issue. And the last thing I want to say, one of the number one, which is going to lead into what you have started to say, one of the number one issues the UNDP has focused on now is that closing the income inequality gap. That is one of their major driving forces, to close that income inequality gap, to create that this huge difference between the extraordinarily wealthy, and that's not in Trinidad, it's around the world. But we talk about our country. And what are we doing? What are you doing as leaders to lead by example? What are you doing as leaders to say, no, we cannot take it? I live in a good enough life as it is already. Maybe, and I never went into politics to make money. Or if I did, well, maybe that was the job for me. So go ahead.
No, Karen, I just want to make one for discussion purposes, because I think we have captured not all, but most of the arguments, that surrounds this sensitive issue. Do you know that in the United States of America, again, they have their own culture in the politics? What happens in America is that you would find, if you do a survey, and maybe I will undertake to do something like that.
Yeah.
Some of the presidents, when they actually became the president of the United States of America, do you know they took a pay cut? Because what they were actually earning, given what their investments were, what groups they belong to, the lobbying groups that would lobby them for different things. It's a different culture altogether. You would have found that some of the presidents would have actually earned less as the president of the United States of America than when they were actually an individual in their own business entities and occupying themselves, whether they were members of Congress or Senate or what have you, and they were being lobbied by different groups, and they were basically, that they are lobbied in America to be able to put forward bills before not their parliament, but before Congress and what have you. It's a different system altogether, and they actually earn more money. George Bush, right? You had George Bush Senior and George Bush Jr. They would have taken pay cuts to be able. Now, I'm not talking about how well they fared as presidents.
Yeah, because we aren't going down that route. But you can make point.
But I'm saying, if you look at it, if you want to make this comparison just simpliciter with these other countries, they have a different culture altogether. And if you want to move from the Western civilization, Western hemisphere with America, which I have said that it is different, the presidents actually sometimes take a pay cut in what they earn. And we go to the Eastern civilization, the Eastern hemisphere. What you see, as we have already pointed out, meritocracy. There is an institutional architecture of a compendium of laws that are there in place to ensure that there is no corruption. So when you are the brightest and you are the mightiest in your sphere, you are attracted, yes, to the position, you are accepted, and when they pay you that, well, they are confident that, look, you will not be tempted.
And one of the things they make sure to ask them, because, you have to be careful with that too. Because one of the questions that are asked, and one of the considerations are, why are you entering into politics? Because you see, you have to be concerned that, I think, so it has to be a love of country and wanting to make a difference, and you have the ability to do that. And that's why they do accept a pay cut, what they call a discount in what they would have gotten had they stayed in the private practice. And at the end of the day, Dinesh, my thing is, I don't want to go west or east, because listen, we're a tiny little island, we're dependent on everybody, and so you don't need to make enemies with anyone. What we do want to do is, you want to be able to forge your own destiny that is appropriate to your circumstances, and take from each one, because each one has something to offer. And in doing so, your whole objective always would be servant leadership, good leadership, inspirational leadership. And I think this is an opportunity that the Prime Minister had to show that he would not take it, because when you are telling people, he is the one who told people, don't say he didn't tell people, he is the one to tell people we in for a hard time. He told us that. He told us tighten your belt. He told us better days are coming. But I don't know if that is true. But anyhow, he is the one that telling that. So he is acutely aware of the suffering of the people, of the vast majority of this country. He's acutely aware of it. And so by leadership example, like Holness, he didn't tell the rest of the ministers not to take it, He said, I'm not taking it. And did and as if that's your decision, if you feel that they made a ministerial order that they say, well, the salary's gone up, you have a right to decide that you feel that you want, because you are there to serve, that you will use part of that to continue to serve the community. What is wrong with that? What is wrong with that? I can't understand.
I want to make it clear that for discussion purposes and as a genuine concern, if I say, me, Dinesh Shambali, that I'm not accepting whatever the increase translates to for me, it doesn't mean that I don't need it, you know. It doesn't mean that that sum of money, whether it's $3,000, it doesn't mean that I don't have use for it. What it means if I say that I am not accepting it, it means that I understand that there's a bigger picture that is being
Exactly.
painted here. It understands that I occupy a public office position. It understands that I have a duty which is higher than the ordinary citizen. And
Absolutely.
I must lead by example. It can't be, and this is a point I will be making tomorrow. I
It's
want to
true, too.
remind people why it is we enter office.
It's
Why is it?
true.
You can't say that you enter public office because you want to make a contribution, but when the time comes to actually make the contribution by way of showing solidarity with your people, you are saying, but listen, I ain't entitled to be paid more, you know. It is really an oxymoron. And I want to say that for me, it
A contradiction. I don't want to use some big words. People say you're talking over my head.
it's inconsistent, it's a contradiction, yes, but I say that. So people saying, well, if I feel so strongly about it, why don't I not take it and refuse it? That's not the point. The point is that if you are in a position, are you comfortable being in the upper echelons? This is for everybody, not just Prime Minister Rowley. It includes me as well. Are you comfortable with widening the gap between those who are at the lower level income and those who are the higher income level? Are you comfortable that this could possibly translate into a certain state of standard of living, a deteriorated standard of living for the lower income earners, that they now have to resort to untoward means to make, you know, the shortfall for them that will now somehow impact on you? I'm not saying everybody is going to turn to crime. I'm saying that what you are painting is, you are painting a disparity in the society. You're going to paint a society which is now going to have distrust for one another. You're going to have where one section of the
There is distrust already.
yeah, you're going to be showing the society or setting up a platform where one big, massive grouping of the society is always saying, well, I don't want to hear from you and I don't believe anything you say, because it must be self-serving for you. And if it is, sorry, if it
no,
is,
but it's not only that. It's not only that it's Mr. Montano says some very nice things about me, but I wouldn't repeat them because there may be people. Yes, you are right, Mr. Montano, what you said, but you probably know my family, which is why you're saying that, and you're right. But I won't repeat it. But thank you for those kind words. But what I think, as I'm speaking for myself, you know, I really thought it was a great, great honor, a really great honor that I got a chance to not just sit on the sidelines and say something wasn't right, but to really get a chance to see what it was really like to be able to serve your country, to make a difference in your country. To, you know, I thought when I was an MP, I mean, I thought it was one of the greatest things for me to be able to have an MP office, which I made sure was representative ethnically. That was a deliberate decision of always. I said, nobody coming in my office to feel that that is a PNM office or is a UNC office. No, it has to be an everybody office. And I just felt it was such an honor and a privilege, honestly. And I don't think if you don't think like that, if that's not who you are, first of all, you have to have ability, yeah? And that is what the meritocracy. We start back with the meritocracy. So if Dr. Farr wants to use that benchmarking, well, then maybe he should offer himself for service as an MP, and maybe he should offer himself as a minister, as an office as a minister, and he might find things are a little different when you're on the other side of the fence. But you know, it's easy to pick out what you want, and I let you say what you have to say because I will have to. You said it in the beginning, and it is one of the things they had to look at, the financial and economic situation of the country at the time. So I will let you say what you were saying, and I will give some figures. And tell me if when you hear those figures that I'm not making up, go to CSO, go to the Central Bank Monetary Policy, go to the schedule of their report, go to the review of the economy, which is prepared by the technocrats. Go there. Not my word. That is where I got the information from, Mr. Rambali. You say, and I just want to say how terrible the state of our economy is. And that Minister of Energy talking this talk about the ship coming in. What the ship coming in from Venezuela, well, that doesn't matter. It's all fact that matters. I want us to get it, but I don't know. So go ahead.
Well,
Sorry.
I think when we get into that part of the debate, and I know time may be limited, but I want to hear
You go ahead.
One of the classic symptoms or the locus classicus as to why we are where we are economically is the present forex crisis. So we'll get to that. Let me just end the SRC point by saying to all those who have put forward their positions, I am very happy. And I'm sure you are too, that, people are writing, people are calling in, they're putting their comments, you are reading them out. I am tremendously grateful, whether they agree or they agree to disagree or they just outright disagree. I have no problems with that. I think at the end of the day, we must understand government is not a business. And when we look at the private sector, I have said this before, their aim is business oriented. They need to make a profit. Government is not measured just simply by making any kind of profit. They look after the welfare of the people. And when you talk about performance, talk about the performance of how it is we are meeting and treating with the citizenry. So if we talk about crime, you are right. What is the crime statistic right now? We are well on the way to breaking our historical figure, highest figure of homicides in 2022.
That's for the murder, I have other figures, but go ahead.
Right. No, but I'm just using homicides for now, what we would consider the most egregious or serious of crimes. And we are well ahead, yes, but we are well ahead, and the trajectory is that we may break that record that we broke we set, unfortunately, in 2022. So we could just use crime. It's just to look after the welfare of your constituents, of the citizenry. So it requires a different kind of decision making. And this is where I have said before that, Karen, any politician who is in this business, I shouldn't say business, who is in this service of the people for money, for the purpose of making money, they should find another job. Right?
A lot of them.
That is
that is why the meritocracy point is so crucial. I'll say why. I think, for having been inside there, but even just looking in from outside now, the thing about it is people get seduced by the power, because remember now, you have the power of the purse and access to funds that you couldn't possibly in your lifetime even have thought of having unless you were already independently wealthy. Okay, and then you tend not to want to go into government because you don't want to have to answer the Integrity Commission report and then get into your personal life. That's what I think anyhow. That's part of the reason you prefer to be on the outside and help, in the background, right? So a lot of people could offer, don't want to offer for a number of reasons. I always want to read about Albert Montano, who was one of the persons who said something kind, but I want to read this because it is relevant to what we're talking about. I didn't know this about him before. He said, I refused as a councillor in St. George East County Council an increase in 1984 because as a councillor, it was not the right thing when the government was not approving an increase for the daily paid. It's a principle thing. And you see what the government is running the risk of, and they don't understand. People could be silent, but don't take silence because there's something that's basically wrong. When the Salary Review Commission is appointed by the very same president who's appointed by the Prime Minister, who's appointed by the Prime Minister, and then want to distance himself from it, and then giving himself huge increases and tell everybody to take 2%. Sometimes people can't even take care of their day-to-day requirements, and that's a big piece of the population. I don't know if people remember. I mean, in my memory, this is what I remember, so you may have to correct me. But I recall that in 1990, when A.N.R. Robinson stood up in the parliament, they said that by the way, I am not giving support to the 1990 coup. I wasn't in the country at the time. I did not support it. I wasn't even near the government. I was just an ordinary citizen like everybody else, okay? So do not pull out of what I'm saying, what you want to pull out, right? What I am saying is this, that when he stood up, as my understanding, when the country was no cola, they took away the cola because the country had no foreign exchange, next to nothing. They had to have the IMF come in. The salaries had been reduced by 10%, and the things were really, really, really very, very, very hard in the country. And my understanding was the Prime Minister Robinson stood up in the Parliament and wanted the government to approve the spending of $50,000 to erect a statue for Jean Miles. Now, don't get me wrong. I think a lot of people felt that Jean Miles was martyred, allegedly, because she exposed, allegedly, the gas station corruption with one of the former ministers, O'Halloran, who fled to Panama. That's not the point. It was very politically motivated. It wasn't just saying that Jean Miles was made a martyr, because she was martyred, but it was very much infused with a political statement at a time when the country was suffering. And according to what I heard, I'm sure I heard it correctly, that Abu Bakr had said, or someone there said, that was the straw that broke the camel back. People can be pushed so far. People can be pushed so far. Even your most ardent supporters, who get in, instead of 8 hours, getting 5 hours, and they're telling you you're employed. They say the unemployment rate is X%. You want me to give you the figures that Review Commission had to be looking at? Inflation rate is 0.4%. You know what that is called? Stagflation. You know why that is? Nobody's spending no money. You know why? Because they don't have confidence in the economy. The central bank governor said people are saving, but they're not putting it in the bank. Part of it is the charges. A part of the reason is that they may not be able to put it in the bank. I'm not going to say why. The foreign exchange went from 2015 to 10.5 billion to 5.6, and they prop it up with a managed float. I don't know why they keep saying it's as a float. It is a managed float. He keeps injecting money in order to stabilize the exchange rate between the US and but the point is, nearly every single thing that we have, we import, even the intermediate products that is so-called used for the manufacturing sector, which is supposed to earn foreign exchange, they have to import it. So we have no money. The banks reducing you to $2,000 a month in US currency. Your foreign exchange, Dr. Arjun has said, if you took away the bonds, you know what bonds is? It's like if you own a business and all you're doing is borrowing and borrowing and borrowing to keep things afloat. You're fooling your children. Don't worry. This time, you know what you're doing? You're not doing anything to develop the business, you know. All you're doing is borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. They say if you take away all the money that they borrowed on the international market, which is in US dollars, and took it away from the foreign exchange, you end up with zero foreign exchange. How you like that? How you like that your minister went into the HSF, changed the law, in section 15A, to allow him to take out as much as 1.5 billion US a year out of a fund that's primarily looking towards investment. 18.2 million TT dollars since 2016. How you like that? Our debt level is about the same as Jamaica. Jamaica debt level fell from 144% in 2013 to 73 or 74% in 2024. Our is 74%. You know, when you have debt, you know what that means? You know what that debt is? It's those deficits that we carry in. When you put in revenue, which is ridiculous, every year you're getting those revenue niggas wrong. Because you know why? We don't have the production, and you know that. You know we don't have the production. Where you're getting the production in natural gas, you don't have it. It's 4.1 billion cubic feet per day you need, and you have 2.4 billion. That is the facts. And you keep telling people about this 30-year lease with Venezuela. That's not the problem. The problem is OFAC. And then President Trump just passed some law called Bolivar, which even tightened any dealings with Venezuela to sort of use sanctions against countries that do business with Venezuela. Listen, I would like us to get the dragon feed. But even when we do get it, I don't know if you know this, but initially they'll get 150. That's what they say. And the Gazette in Venezuela say 45% of the not the profits, but the gross has to stay in Venezuela. And then of that, out of the initially 100 million cubic feet, and then it will go up to 350. And of the 350, 300 goes to LNG. That's like sending out cocoa inside of chocolates and using it for downstream. And listen, they are every marker. This government has made a mess of the economy, right? So I'm going to end by saying, if I was sitting on that, but you see, look who appoint them. Look who appoint them. That's why you need somebody in an independent president appointed by NGOs, by trade unions, by private sector, by different things, and people qualified to elect the president. So when the president make decisions, it is not the prime minister making it, and it is therefore not political. So it's just a very sad situation. So all of you who cannot see something wrong with the 2%, 3%, but the 80-something% there, and all of you could scarce see something not wrong and unfair and inequitable about that. You are putting on blinders, and that is what you call, you have to have loyalty, but you don't put the loyalty, la patria, your country, before party. Because your children and your grandchildren will suffer because of yours. And don't complain when it happens, because it is you making the decisions. You decide with your eyes wide shut that these are decisions you are making because of putting your values in the wrong place. And I am not going for any party or against. I am not. I'm speaking for my country. So I let Dinesh Rambali finish today's show. He has 10 minutes, and you can ramage now, because I think I ramage enough.
The extent of Ramajane, I don't know it left any, for me, Karen, but two things. I think we made the point, and I want to just repeat. When you made reference to something that we know we don't wish upon our country, we don't want to see it happen. We are just simply using it as an example of what the atmosphere could become like. When there is this gap that I spoke about, when the gap has widened between those who are in office and those who are earning the lower income bracket earners, that is what happens when you had that 1990 situation. Nobody is asking for it.
No,
God forbid it ever something resembling that ever reaches us again. We don't want that, because that set us back as a country for many years. And it still suffers, we suffer psychologically and otherwise. But that is what can happen in societies when these things happen, and you see you have a very disenchanted, and it's not because people are disenchanted that you are not accepting the increases in salary. It is you are not accepting it because the principle seems to be fair, it is equitable, it is a principle of compassion, it is a principle that encompasses some level of empathy that you ought to have as somebody who has offered themselves in political life, public office. You lead by example, and we have cited all of the examples, or at least some of the examples here today of our CARICOM neighbors. And you are right, you have identified 3 leaders who are really charting the way, and they are very well respected. Whether they talk about reparations, whether they talk about things which is domestic, internally in their own countries, whether they talk about matters that are regional in CARICOM, they are very well respected. President Irfan Ali of Guyana, of course, Prime Minister Mia Mottley, and then you also have Andrew Holness of Jamaica. Those are 3 names that stand out. With the greatest of respect to Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley, he is really nowhere in their league. And this is a clear example that we are experiencing now with this SRC debate as to why he can never be on the level of these leaders. So that is number one. Number two, the point I wanted to make and to leave with is that, well, not necessarily leave with, because we may have a few minutes, but I know that there is a prominent attorney at law who wrote a book on ethics, legal ethics, and what is required of attorneys at law in terms of how they treat with the profession, right, under the Legal Profession Act and otherwise. And in that book, that attorney at law made reference to what is expected of lawyers. So I think when I read that book from time to time, I think, Karen, you know the author of that book. It is still recommended for law school.
You don't talk about my book.
Right? So I'm talking about those who don't know. We owe a duty. You see, people may not understand. We owe a duty to the judiciary, and that is something that lawyers owe under the Legal Profession Act to the judiciary and to the administration of justice. And that is something that I will be speaking about tomorrow. I didn't want to speak today because, as I said, I may not have done justice to the topic, but I will be speaking about it because I think what Dr. Rowley did was he perpetrated a very unfair level of undermining of the judiciary by just that mere red herring that he threw out, that we were under threat or we were being threatened.
That they were going to sue us.
Yes, that we were going to be sued by the
The
judiciary.
commissioner was going to be sued, yes.
Yeah, and dragging the judiciary into something like this. So that's something I want to deal with in a little bit more detail.
Yes.
I think that when it boils down to it, you have held high public office, former Minister of Finance, former Cabinet Minister, former Member of Parliament. So you wore caps, and they were very senior caps in terms of public service. I have held for a short time Member of Parliament, albeit on the opposition side. I think that when people, I would want them to take away from this program, if anything, that here it is, you are hearing from two office holders. We may both be lawyers, but we are both public office holders. And we are of the view that as public office holders, there is a bigger demand, a greater duty cast on us as public office holders to do what is right. Doing what is right is not always advantageous to yourself. And so when you look at remuneration, and it's not always equates to remuneration, sometimes it could be that, look, I think I'm being treated unfairly in the public domain, but you take a stance that, look, I am doing this because at the end of the day, I don't want to undermine the institution which I represent. I don't want to be disadvantageous towards the very constituents, the citizens who I represent. And this is one of those occasions where the duty demands that the leaders, including myself, but it demands certainly the Prime Minister and his cabinet and the government to take a position and say, listen, we have reconsidered this. We understand, maybe we thought that we would have been able to do it, and now is the time. But clearly the argument, maybe they are not going to do it, but if they are intent on fulfilling their obligation and their oath of office, and just the general tenor and principles of what public office holders' duty is towards the citizenry, they would know that the decent thing to do is to say no on that SRC recommendation at this time, and leave that for after a long time when we know that the lower level income and the majority of the country have been brought up to a level of wages and earnings where their back pay has been sorted out. They are living above the poverty line, and everybody is living not rich. They are living sufficiently competent where they and their children are able to enjoy the basic amenities in this country. Right now, people don't understand that you have people who are not enjoying the basic amenities. Yes, we are.
I get calls every now and again on that. It surprises me when people that call me. You feel very sorry for them. And I think what we really want to say is that even though my time was short and you are a recent member of the thing, the time that, because of the position I held, you and I'm sure, you learn a lot about government. The things that you thought were like that are like that. The things that you thought about certain people, it is so. The things that you think that people have hidden agendas, it is true. The things that you think that people wouldn't do, they would do. You get such, and when they tell you about politics, I mean, I could say, speaking now from the outside, probably that's why I'm so passionate about it and so outspoken about it, is because one, I try to do my research. I say, David giving me a coffee, you sound like trying to tell me you're going to wind up just now.
No.
Anyway, I want to just say, Mr. Montano, Mr. Colin Smith, Mr. Prasad, thank you so much. You all are so wonderful. You continue to make contributions, and it is people like you that give me and give people like Mr. Rambali, who I know is passionate. I know that I've sat with him otherwise, and I know he loves his country, and we try as hard as much as possible. We don't go into the party politics. We deal country politics, and however you want to interpret that, we leave it to you.
Karen, I want to thank you tremendously. I want to commend you tremendously, and I want to thank you profusely for allowing me this opportunity to share this discussion with you, because even in this discussion, what I may think I have, would have understood and marshaled some of the facts. I mean, you brought it out very clearly to me, and I'm very grateful for that.
So still your teacher then.
Yes, correct. And in those names you mentioned, as I said, all who engage, this is a debate that has to continue, because if we intend on building country, you notice I have not said in anywhere in this debate that you should support the opposition and not the government, or a particular party over another. When that time comes, whenever the election bell is rung, that's your choice. You do what you have to do, inform yourselves. But for now, this is a people's issue. This is a bread and butter issue, and nobody's immune from it. So this is one that people should really say we must ensure that we take the right steps and we do it in a timely manner. And now is the time. So I want to
thank you very much. I know I'll be a lot more from you. I see the OWTU is going to be marching again, and I think they're trying to get other people to march. This is that in Europe and in the United States is a common thing. You're not being a bad person to come out and talk because you're coming to say you don't you don't agree with something, and this is the opportunity for those in power to listen to you. And so there's nothing wrong as long as there's no violence and there's no disruptive behavior. Nothing is wrong with marching. Nothing is wrong, because that's your way to show your dissatisfaction, and that is your right under the Constitution, Section 4 and 5, etc. So thank you, Mr. Dinesh Rambali, for being our guest this afternoon. And actually, I would give you this little secret. I nearly didn't do today's show, and then I said, you know what? It's SRC. I'm sure if I call Dinesh Rambali, I am positive he will come on the show, and you did not disappoint. And so thank you so much, and thank you, David, for always being there. And for all of you who are listening in, and all of you who have made comments, we appreciate it. And remember, country before anything. Country before. You love your country, you love your children, you love your grandchildren, you'll do the right thing. Good evening.
Good evening.
All right.
Thank you so much, Karen, and thank you, Mr. Rambali. It's been very, very informative today. Very informative.
Okay. Good evening. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
That's it for today's edition of Hard Talk with Karen Nunez Tesheira and her special guest, Mr. Dinesh Rambali. Karen will be back next Monday.